now going to hand you over to Miss Katrina Crowe, who's the curator of the first Thought Talks. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jack, and welcome to all of you this uncertain morning in terms of the weather. But it looks like it's going to clear up. I see sunshine appearing out there now. Long may it last. As you can see, we've been upgraded to a new venue because there are so many intelligent people in Galway who want to come and hear the marvellous things that our speakers have to tell them. And we have a very important session this morning. The recent TV series Adolescence brought home the frightening amount of misogynistic poison pouring into young people's phones and the potentially horrific consequences of doing nothing about it. Teacher Eoghan Cleary has been working with his own adolescent students and publishing vital support material for other teachers for many years. He will be joined by Professor Debbie Ging of DCU, whose research focuses on these phenomena, and Patrick Freyne, Irish Times journalist whose writing presents a very different model of young Irish masculinity. And they will be moderated by Dearbhail McDonald, whom all of you will know from her expert regular stewarding of weekend radio on RTE, and from her fascinating documentaries on Irish clergy, the most recent of which on Irish missionaries aired last Monday night and was absolutely spellbindingly interesting, I have to say. Really, really wonderful stuff, Dearbhail. She chairs the strategy committee of the Centre Culturel Irlandais in Paris and is a member of the board of Fighting Words, Ireland's National Creative Writing Centre for children and young adults. And she's also a major heroine because she got up at 4 o'clock this morning in the Glenties in Donegal at the McGill Summer School and drove down here and has had 40 minutes of sleep, I think. Yeah. So she's still going to be on top of her game as she always is. Please welcome Dearbhail McDonald and our guest.
Thank you very, very much. I have to say, I was in Glenties last night for the McGill Summer School where I was moderating the debate on the presidency, coming to Galway for some light relief this morning to talk about adolescence. Katrina, thank you so much. One of the advantages of being a recidivist moderator at the First Thoughts talks here at the Galway International Arts Festival is I've seen the growth of this segment of the festival. Every year I've been, they've had to move to a bigger and bigger auditorium. We've been in small places, moving last year to a lecture theatre, here today to Bailey Allen, and I've no doubt we're going to be in that big tent very, very soon. And sure, why not? When the 4-part psychological drama Adolescence burst onto our screens last March, the subject matter and the incredible one-shot filming style, that was where each of the episodes was filmed in a single continuous take, and it shocked and awed in equal measure. And that drama dropped on Netflix just as, the crossbow killer Kyle Clifford, that had emerged that he had been searching for misogynistic podcasts, and he had watched Andrew Tate videos for hours before murdering 3 members of the Hunt family. They recently gave a very, very moving interview, the father and the remaining sister of that. But these stories are stories that are increasing with a depressing familiarity and regularity. Stephen Graham, who was also the star, the idea came to him after a spate of distressing violent crimes. And as Katrina said, it did just bring home to us that frightening, the scale and extent of misogynistic poison pouring into young people's phones. The issue is more than just a tech issue. It's a public health crisis, one that has resulted in our own government setting up an online health task force. And we have 2 members of that task force with us today to say what can we do to just maybe explore some of those questions. What can we do to mitigate and prevent those harms caused to children and young people by certain types of online activity. As part of my extensive research, I spoke to my 12-year-old godson and asked him about adolescence, and his view was, parents don't have a clue, and I thought that was about as an expert a view as many. But as we say, we have a brilliant, brilliant panel. We will be going to you for questions, so when we get to that stage, please do engage. But for now, I just maybe just want to go to each of you. Oh, and I might just start. You have a background in theatre and arts as well, and I just wanted, just before we get into the subject issue, what did you make of Adolescence just as a piece of art and as a piece of film in and of itself?
It was amazing in terms of writing, directing, acting, the innovation in terms of cinematography. It was absolutely brilliant and hugely captivating. in terms of performances, I think what they managed, the space they created for the young guy who played Jamie to be able to be as authentic and raw as he was
stunning young actor.
Exceptional, yeah. And Stephen Graham was obviously brilliant, absolutely brilliant in being able to bring that need to be vulnerable in his expression, but not knowing how, and then finally, obviously, in the end, getting that point where he allows himself to break down.
And Patrick, why do you think it pierced through in the manner, that it did? This wasn't we've been hearing a lot about this issue. So it wasn't the first sort of perhaps depiction of this issue, either in art or in documentary form or in any other sort of narrative form. But for some reason, it just pushed through with this sensation that I think would be fair to say terrified most, if not all, parents and adults who actually got a chance to see it.
Well,
over 100 million people at this stage.
It pushed through because it was really good art and it was really well made. But there's loads of good stuff that's really well made. It also kind of hit on something I think a lot of people have been kind of worried about in the corner of their mind. Like, I've been writing pieces for the last few years about young people and social media. And when you talk to young people, they say what your godson says, that like parents and teachers largely don't have a clue what they're looking at. I did a piece last year with Jen Hogan where we interviewed loads of kids from a lot of different backgrounds and asked them to look at their like TikTok feeds. The first two we saw were really wholesome, and then we realized they were showing us their fake TikTok feeds, because a lot of kids have fake ones. And then the more we looked at it, the more even the kind of milder stuff was kind of edging on distressing. Like, there was kind of misogynistic jokes, and there was a lot of street fights and violence, and they're just in this world in which the people who are meant to be looking after them, us, have kind of abdicated it to social media giants who don't care. So you get a whole system where it's like aggression and conflict is incentivized on those platforms, and a lot of grifters are making money by producing content that draws the eye. They're not, a lot of them aren't even ideological themselves, they're just producing stuff they know people will.
And even with things like parental controls, like Patrick, parents themselves don't understand the tech. They sort of reassure themselves by saying, well, I can see what they're going on, but they don't really.
No, they don't, and kids do have like fake TikTok profiles, and they do have cleaned up versions, and like that was the first time I realized that loads of kids have more than one TikTok account, because they've one to show parents to go, look, I'm just like, the first one we looked at, it was just like lovely football clips and cars, and then it was actually an inside whistleblower said the lads were showing you their fake ones, they were joking outside, so I kind of feel like why adolescence pushed through is everyone suspects this. And part of the reason everyone suspects this is I think most people here probably have some form of social media profile, and you know how even marginally toxic your own one is, right? So we all know that our social media profiles are a weird secret world, and kids who are much more vulnerable are in that weird secret world without any of the training or knowledge of life than we have.
Debbie, sometimes it's the world, if the artists are the antennae of the race, sometimes it takes our artists, whether it is in theatre or music or in film, to kind of punch through and tell us a story about ourselves. Watching it, first and foremost, not in your professional line, but just watching it as a piece of film, what was it about it that captivated you? Like, what terror did it sort of feed into?
I think it touched a societal nerve in a way that other similar dramas in this genre maybe haven't succeeded in doing, and I think it ties in with what you were saying as well about it's a certain moment, because the manosphere has been around for quite a long time. I've been researching it for over 10 years. Not that people have been aware of it until this recent mainstreaming of the manosphere, monetization with the masculinity influencers like Tate and various other characters. So I think that's what's brought it onto people's radar. And so it's the kind of combination of that awareness now that people have that they didn't even have maybe 3 years ago, because it was really TikTok and COVID and the rise of influencer culture, that combination that brought these masculinity influencers into children's feeds and into the limelight. And so it's very kind of opportune in that respect. But I think as well the kind of visual dynamics, the aesthetic dynamics of the show are really important as well. The way they center, there's this incredibly stressful scene at the beginning when Jamie is arrested.
So many of the scenes
So many
were stressful.
scenes. I mean, it's like so incredibly physically stressful to watch. But that scene where where Jamie has been strip searched and he's been poked and prodded and having blood samples taken, and his father can't believe this is happening, and it's, you know, it feels like a violation of children's rights. So you're very kind of empathetic, and you're drawn in, I think, psychologically and emotionally into that space. But the camera focuses on the father's face watching this. I think the police officer and the doctor turn away when he's been strip searched, but the father's watching him, and I think it's nearly a minute that we're just seeing his face, and we're seeing all these emotions twitch and flit across his face.
It was such a tense piece of drama, and what was interesting about it, obviously, Eoghan, when you're producing something like that, you get to choose the lens, and this was very much a story, I felt, about boys, for boys. And I listened a lot to a lot of the coverage around it, and listened to the two producers at the time when they were asking, they were being asked, why didn't you hone in on the dead girl? We saw and heard very, very little about this. This was not focusing in on her, but actually they stood over and defended that lens. They said, no, we wanted to create that space. We wanted the lens to focus on that. And it was a courageous, you could argue, decision to take. But what did you think? Did it open up a space for boys and men to talk about who have been under a huge assault, they would argue, and particularly with language around manosphere, all of this stuff. But was it a clever thing to focus in on that? The dead girl was almost, I won't quite say incidental, but she was certainly absent.
Yeah. When I saw it first, I was so excited and relieved that they had created a space whereby I think that so many men have been trying to get into this conversation for so long, but so many didn't know how to engage in it, didn't know if it was their place, didn't have the vocabulary, or didn't know how to articulate it. And what the show did was it allowed men and boys to see that they are also the victims of the situation that is being played out on them. When we think of misogynists and violence against women, we have villains in our minds often. We don't think of innocent 13-year-old boys, but it is innocent. And
we don't think of how they evolve into those villains.
Absolutely not, but it is innocent young boys who are being groomed by the people who, I don't know if they want to turn them into misogynists, but they know how to make money out of them. And this is the most extreme way to make money out of them. And unfortunately, there was a massive gap in what masculinity... I mean, I think in Ireland, we were moving in a really positive direction when it came to masculinities, and I could certainly see that in the young people in my classes. But then in that space of uncertainty where we didn't really know where we were going, we didn't want to get it wrong again, and we didn't really know what we're defining masculinity as yet. In that vacuum that was created, the money-making models of the world, most of them misogynistic, drove in and took advantage of that and took advantage of our boys and have groomed them into young men who have ideas about themselves that do not serve them and do not serve women and do not serve anybody in society. But unfortunately, we allowed it to happen. Like, boys do feel absolutely victimized in this way because they're being... We are raising them to be one thing still. We're still teaching them the ways to be a successful, stereotypical man. And then we're telling them that it's wrong when they grow up. We're telling them that it's toxic. And so when I go into a class and I go to talk about gender-based violence, every boy in the class immediately folds his arms because he assumes that I'm assuming he's a potential perpetrator. And even though collectively we are, individually, nobody wants you to think that about them. So, but we have to, young boys just want to become they just want to know what we want them to become, and they are becoming what they're being told they should become, and we're doing that. And
Patrick, what about that? I mean, because you've worked a lot with these young people. I know you've worked with Eoghan, but that sense of cultivating online identities when kids are that young, is it that there are very, very confusing signals being sent in their direction?
I think there are confusing signals. I think the internet and social media is generally a very confusing place. I think it's a very confusing place for adults. Like if you go through anyone's feed on any social media feed, like it's kind of random and crazy in a lot of ways. And I think the problem now is that when young people, in your teens, people are looking for identity, and what's happening in a lot of the online spaces now, in the manosphere and elsewhere, like in all sorts of different ways, and not just to children, to adults, people are being different, really narrow forms of identity are being pushed on people. And increasingly, like even we talk about the manosphere, but there's a bunch of different things in there that are all completely contradictory. There's like people like Jordan Peterson who's like pushing traditional family values. There's people like Andrew Tate saying, sleep with every woman you can and hate them. And then there's kind of insult culture telling boys that women are evil and avoid them. So there's like all these different increasingly narrow brands of identity. And I think if you're 13 and 14 and confused and you want to belong and maybe you don't have a sense of belonging in your day-to-day life, maybe you're being bullied yourself in school, to go into like a social media platform where somebody is telling you this is the answer, this is how to be. And I don't think it's just young boys. I think girls, all sorts of people are susceptible to those weird, narrow, polarizing identities, and they're all conflict-based.
And can I ask you, Debbie, just to go back to that, about the lens that that was chosen? Obviously, we weren't looking at the young girl. I think that it was probably a fair choice to say, okay, we're making an editorial choice to do this. But it would have been a very, very different series had it been concentrating on the young woman or on her young friend, for example, you know, who we got to see a little bit of, but there was no real depth to her.
I mean, for me, one of the, I suppose, limitations in some ways of the show was the fact that we couldn't understand the friend's anger beyond the fact that her friend had been killed. And I think it was a real void that they missed a chance. And I don't really agree that it would have been a different show, to be honest with you. I think they could have inserted some small, very short scenes just to show us why the girls are so angry, because it's not just about the online world. You know, every time they walk past the guys look at them, they rate them out of 10. You know, there's this constant, they get dick pics sent to their phones every single day. This is just the background noise to their lives. But it's, you know, they're furious, and very often they don't even have a vocabulary to describe how furious they were. And I thought that scene when the friend, you know, is in a kind of incandescent rage was really powerful, but we needed to know why they're so angry. And I think they missed a trick there. I don't think it needed to be, I don't think it would have been a different story. I just think they could have done a few more short scenes to show us where the anger comes from.
Speaking of anger, what was really intriguing was, you know, about the dad. Stephen Graham captured a very, very complicated man and a very, very complicated role model. And, you know, that bit where the mother and the daughter are constantly trying to regulate his dysregulation. They're constantly, you know, anybody who's been in a situation in work or in their personal life where you're sort of walking on eggshells, and that was one of the not quite as overt, but one of those subtle things where, again, you were feeling that tension. So even sometimes I had to go, it was fiction, you know, because I kind of still think, I'm just like, but Jamie, but you know, when you look at and his own father was giving very complicated signals to him about what masculinity and manhood meant.
Yeah, and he had made such an incredible effort not to continue the cycle of violence, and said he would never hit his children the way that his father had hit him. So he was trying his best, but he had no guidance. He had nobody around to support him, and you know, no education in this kind of space. So for him, the best he could do was not be physically violent, but he was symbolically violent all the time. I mean, he tore down the shed at one point, we found that out.
Throwing the paint, everything, yeah.
And so
there was an atmosphere around the dad of this kind of constantly...
Exactly. They're having to manage him, they're afraid of him, and Jamie grew up around that, but also understanding violence as somehow part of masculinity. You know, even though it's very internalized, he can't articulate it. He says to the psychologist, my father isn't violent, he never hit us, but he has grown up observing and feeling this.
It's almost like a coercive thing. One of the things that really struck with me was when the detective's young son brings him in to say, Dad, you don't know what these symbols mean, aubergines, everything, and sort of has to give him a little mini masterclass, you know. And this is where I kind of see my nieces and nephews, where they sort of mock us as kind of, it's just like, you don't understand our world, you don't understand our our language. And in a sense, maybe what it captured was the different worlds that parents and children occupy. And obviously children are digital natives. You know, they're coming to this with a much more technical skill, and as you said, Patrick, they can work their way around it. But how bad is it? Like, I mean, you work with this stuff. Like, I mean, what is it that young Irish children and children elsewhere are being exposed to? I don't know if anyone was reading recently, but in the UK, they're changing the national curriculum on sex education. So 15, 16 and 17-year-olds are going to be learning not just about privacy, not just about consent, but strangulation, choking. Anal rape is going to be on the curriculum in terms of what they need to do to educate children about, and that is what they're being exposed to. Like, is it as bad as we as adults think?
Yeah, I think it's really important to say that, first of all, what we see online and what we see in our social media feed is not what kids see in their social media feeds. What we see is what the tech companies have decided based on their market research and based on what we pause on and what we scroll on is going to keep us most online for most of the time. But what kids see is entirely different. I have these conversations with young people every day and have had for the last 8 years. 1 in 10 9-year-olds have been exposed to porn. 80% of our senior cycle students have said they've been exposed to violent, misogynistic pornography. And this
is not pornography like when we were growing up, top shelf or page 3 in the Sun.
Just going to say, when I say the word porn, unless you're a current porn user, our idea of porn, certainly from when I was growing up, and like when, like for me to access porn, I had to wait for the whole family to be out of the house to access the family computer. I had to unplug the phone, plug in the computer, wait for an image to come down on the screen. By then, my parents were probably driving back in the drive and had to unplug the computer, just because it would take. But now they have access 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in their pocket, and they are not going looking for it. 9-year-olds don't go looking for porn online. They're being targeted by it every single day. And it is so just to and I'm not going to get graphic about it, but 90% of the online free mainstream online porn that's available, 90% of it includes physical violence. And when I did that research first, my students, TY students who I was having the discussion said, "What do you mean by violence?" So I got into the raw data, and they didn't count verbal aggression or threats of aggression. They just counted physical acts of violence. And there are an average of 11 acts of physical violence per 10 minutes of content in porn now. And that includes simulated rape, real rape, throwing her around, choking, anal sex, strangulation, and this. I only know this because my students tell me about it in class, and not when I ask them about porn. I do not bring porn to the classroom. I ask them what they think is expected of them in a sexual encounter because they're male or because they're female, and they're the ones that name choking. And that's at 15 years old and 16 years old, and talking to GPs in Wicklow and South County Dublin, young girls at the age of 15 are turning up with sexually inflicted injuries and anal fissures because anal sex is becoming an expectation that young girls have, because in the absence of adequate sex education in this country, still, even though the curriculum has just changed, but in the absence of adequate training and confidence to talk about these things, our young people are still going online. And before they even get to go online, sexual violence is being normalized for them, so that before anybody else talks to them about what healthy sexuality might be, they already know, and they think they know better than we do, because that's what all young people do. But unfortunately, they have taken their sexual conditioning out of the hands of the people who care for them and handed them straight into the hands of the misogynistic porn industry.
And Debbie, like, I mean, in one sense, how can that be when you look at the top 10 list of kind of, videos that people seek out and that children are receiving, and it is strangulation, it is, choking, it's very,
incest.
very violent forms, incest, stepbrother, stepsister.
Number 1 in Ireland.
Stepbrother, incest.
Incest, yeah. It's the number 1 on the top rated on Pornhub. I used to name that, but there's no point now. On Pornhub, it's the number 1 what's hot in Ireland today, and there's 8.5 million views of it. And that's what when a child goes on to see that, that's what they see as being normalized, and then they also see that actually 8.5 million people have viewed it. That's a massive message. So it doesn't even matter. I mean, sorry, of course it matters what Andrew Tate and all those people are saying, but actually they're living it and they're sexually stimulating themselves to it in a way that conditions them. And then when they hear what Andrew Tate says, it makes so much sense because they're seeing it every day.
And because Debbie Ging, so much of that, what was once perhaps viewed as extreme, has been mainstreamed and normalised, not just for children, but for adults as well, so that these are the expectations that are feeding down. What damage does it do? It was interesting, there was a neuroscientist and clinical psychologist talking about the presidency last night, and he said somewhat humorously that it was the Irish public were right to reject people becoming president until they were 35, because he said men's brains didn't mature really until their early 30s, and they got a bit of a laugh. But when you think about young brains and what they are exposed to at that young age, if that is their normal and that is what is coming in without the benefits of an education system or a proper sort of parental support to mitigate against that, like, I mean, the damage must be huge.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think we're seeing that. I mean, you know, from a psychological point of view, they're effectively training their, you know, neural pathways and reward systems of dopamine hits with ever more graphic and violent material, because the bland stuff doesn't do it. You have to keep, it's an addictive kind of process. You have to keep seeking out more and more extreme material.
And it's the gateway. You mightn't set out to go into the very extreme, but it's pulling you in.
And very often, that's how, a lot of men have said that they end up in child sexual abuse material, is through that they didn't go in looking for it, but they've ended up in it because it's the more, it's what is the most taboo thing. And you kind of need that for the physical and psychological reward system. But from a sociological point of view, we're seeing now increasing evidence of huge amounts of sexual abuse occurring between young people. It's not, it's much less now that it's, I mean, of course, there's a lot of sexual violence perpetrated by older men towards children.
And what's very interesting is that when you look at the history of many people who are sexual predators and convicted predators, is that when you go and ask them, when did these urges happen, or and they trace it back often to their adolescent years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think there has been a reluctance, probably, provoked in large part by the dominance of post-feminist culture, where all of this stuff was supposed to be fun, and pole dancing was liberating, and lap dancing is great, and all of this kind of stuff. None of it threatened the patriarchy in any way ever, and to me that's always the litmus test. Does your average kind of sexist guy like this stuff, or does he find it like empowering for women? It's like he likes it, it's not threatening. So it was always a lie that any of this was empowering for me. But I think there was a large period where it was difficult to talk about porn in these terms, and it was almost a taboo. You were considered to be a sex-negative feminist if you talked about porn in a problematic way, and people were very insistent on this divide between reality and fantasy, that of course porn is weird, and of course it's obscure and sometimes dark, because it's about fantasies. It's not about real life, and people can separate those things. But I think we're seeing now that gap, is a
children
is a
can't,
fantasy.
Patrick Freyne.
No.
Children can't. They're not equipped to distinguish often between the
Yeah, and
reality and the fantasy when they're at that sort of tender stage of their lives, when their conscience and their consciousness of these things is being formed and tested.
So, like, when I've done pieces with Eoghan and with other groups of young people where we've gone along, where they're doing programs like Eoghan's doing in like youth centres, and we've talked to kids, what they always say, they always have huge relief that it's been brought up. Like when we talked to Eoghan's students a few years ago for a piece, like there was girls and boys, and they were just both so relieved it was being talked. They were all so relieved it was being talked about. They felt so much better. They didn't feel so weird and alone with it. Because I think a lot of the time, like sometimes they talk to each other about it, but sometimes they're seeing stuff and they've no context for it, and they're almost scared to tell anyone else. Like in the context of kids seeing stuff young, I remember a teenager saying that she first saw porn when she was like 11, and it was because she was trying to download some TV show, go to an illegal site, and the illegal site just had porn pop-ups. And she was really disturbed, but then she felt she couldn't tell her parents because she'd get in trouble, because we have a very problematic relationship with all this stuff. We find it difficult to talk about this stuff. I think sometimes parents and teachers prefer to respond punitively rather than talk about the feelings that this thing evoked. So kids go around with this stuff in their brains.
And then they are drawn into those secret worlds. There was recently a conviction in my own part of the world where I come from, where a young man from Newry had been involved in incredible criminal activities, which led to the death of a young woman, a young girl and her father. And just when you see just how you know, because you see your kids maybe and they're in a room and you're thinking, oh my God, they're on those devices, and maybe the terror that it speaks to is that, are they in that world? Are they being groomed? You know,
So, like,
when they're telling you they're doing, you know...
They are.
Yeah,
they are in that
they are
world.
being groomed.
It's really, yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say that it's not just that kids go on to commit crimes. Like, I think that because most kids...
become victims of it as well.
Well, most kids, it's not even that. It's that they're living with really disturbing stuff that's shaping them. And they may not commit a crime, they may not hurt someone, but they're, like, I remember again talking to young people who were so relieved that a youth worker or a teacher was talking to them about it. There was one kid in your school who was like so freaked out by the things he'd seen. Like, he hadn't done anything bad, but he was so freaked out, and you could tell that having a safe space to discuss it was a relief. And he could have gone down some sort of channel of fear, and I think that's the fear, I think, turns into aggression. I think a lot of the Andrew Tate stuff is, you know, aggression is a response to your personal fear. And I think a lot of kids see this stuff far too young. And it's not just the really extreme stuff, it's also just the mild toxicity of an average, like, TikTok feed. You know, it's slowly making you feel like the world is a scary place. And if you put all that together and you add somebody who's telling you that all the answers are become this sort of man, it's quite dangerous.
Can I talk about the regulation of all of this? So, Eoghan Cleary, if I want to use a piece of music, Coldplay or something, for example, that's a totally different debate. Next year, Katrina, next year, that'd be a good topic. But let's say I want to use a piece of music, and the law of copyright will come in, hook, line, and sinker, and they've got that bound to rights. And then it comes to, you know, real crime, child exploitation, child harm, grooming, all of that. And if you look inside those boxes or whatever algorithms, whatever the tech is that they use, arguably, that's a crime scene. So if a woman or a child was being attacked in that building next door, the guards wouldn't be going to court to get a court order to politely ask the company, would you ever mind taking that down as causing harm? We have a risk of suicide of a young child, blah, 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 blah. All of that.
Yeah.
And to me, it seems that within this, and I mean real, like, I mean, this is a grim conversation. You know, this is not scaremongering. This is a grim and difficult conversation. And these, for me, sometimes just do feel like virtual crime scenes. And yet there seems to be a helplessness. We can do it for copyright. We can do it for all other sort of manners. And then it comes to something really serious. And the difficulty, when you speak to Gardaí and others, when they need to take down, they're going in seeking something. And the challenges that they have, why is it so difficult? Are the profits just simply too big?
Yeah, I'm just going to put specifics on the grimness of it for a second, if that's okay.
As long as you give us a bit of hope at the end, otherwise...
Yeah, I will, absolutely.
A tricky Sunday.
Last year, according to the Irish regulator, hotline.ie, there were 4,322 emails reported to the Irish regulator alone for having self-generated, which is a problematic term, but self-generated child sex abuse material on it. And 57% of that content, so that's 4,322 websites, 57% of the self-generated, that's kids who have been tricked or coerced into uploading videos or pictures of themselves to the online world, were of 8 to 12-year-olds. So we live in a world where there is no and that's illegal. If I had it in my possession now, I'd be going to jail. But if it's facilitated on a social media platform, they are not held legally responsible for that. They have to take it down, but there's no criminal liability there for them. It's a massive, massive problem. We have a Children's First Act in Ireland whereby anybody who wants to engage with a child, whether it's a youth service or a church or a school or an individual, you have to meet a very stringent set of criteria because of the history that we have of looking after and not looking after children in this country. When they go online, there is absolutely nothing, no regulation whatsoever. We have the headquarters of some of the biggest tech firms in the country here. There are millions of euro coming through Ireland every single year, and we have the power to regulate them. However, not to get too complicated, but the Digital Services Act at an EU level limits us in many, many ways, because you have to many ways, we are reliant on Europe putting it across the board because we can't be seen to be treating a digital service unequally in Ireland separately to the rest of Europe. It's why France recently tried to put age verification in to stop Pornhub from, and Pornhub said, well, if you're doing that, we're getting out of the country. And France brilliantly said, great, goodbye. And then the court order was reversed because Pornhub's billing headquarters are located in Ballyfermot in Dublin, and 450 million goes through that building every year, 12.5% of which our government gets. But their content creating headquarters are in Cyprus, so we have to wait for Cyprus to regulate them.
Patrick, there are cultural differences when it comes to the internet. You know, in the US, they kind of say, well, listen, we're just the highway. What happens on the highway, that's you have to behave yourself when you're on the highway. And in Europe, there is a different, I think, a more protective culture. But why do you think it is that for something as explicit as child grooming, child harm, that there isn't that, I suppose, we look at this as a public health crisis, which it is, and there's arguments as to whether do you go criminal law route or public health or both. Why is it so difficult to get movement on the tech companies?
Because the tech companies have done an amazing job of propaganda about tech, like that whole kind of idea that anything in the tech world is inevitable and that we have no choice in it. They're doing it now with AI. There's this constant push of the notion that this stuff just happens. There's no way to stop kids accessing it. There's no way, I think there's two things. I think we do need to find ways to regulate the companies. I think they should be treated more like publishers. They argue that they're like the telecoms industry. You can't blame can't blame Vodafone if you make a bad phone call or something. But I think they should be treated more like publishers.
And they are under the EU copyright law.
And then the second thing is I do think culturally I think regulation is most important, and I hate conversations about this that just don't point out that they have the smartest, most moneyed people in the world working on making us all prisoners of this thing. We also need, as a culture, to think about how we're using it, and this is secondary, but really important. I think for all of our talk about young people's use of social media, I think most adults would think who use it would consider their use kind of problematic, their own use. And I think we need to get into, you can't be, if your kids are constantly on screens and you're also constantly on a screen, it's very hard to make the argument that, it's like our approach to drink, telling young people not to drink while we all get blot. There's a problem.
Well, actually, they're not drinking in the same way as we would have when we were their age. Debbie, I just want to come back just to the gender element. I left Trinity 25 years ago. We've got our 25-year reunion coming up, and I was just reflecting when I was driving up this morning that I thought the gender war was over then. I thought the only thing we had to sort out was childcare. It was a really, coming out of law school in 2000 was a really, a brilliant time. We were sort of coming back, the economy, everything was building up. And now it feels, as a woman, and I'm looking at, women, young women and young men, but just thinking the culture war sometimes feels deeper than ever before. And, we had Me Too, we had Time's Up, and for a moment, but that seemed to be like a fleeting moment rather than actually the profound moment people thought that it was. Do you think and I don't even like constructing that because I don't believe in setting men and women up against each other. I think we need to bring men in, not drive them out. But are we in a very acute, when you look at that, I think you spoke earlier just about that intersection between incels, the alt-right, the far-right. There's a very, very complicated Venn diagram.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of, historical things that have happened that have complicated this. And, we tend to think that it all happens in this kind of linear, progressive way, that, progress is moving forward all the time. But of course, there's backlashes and there's regressive periods. And so I mentioned post-feminism. So you're talking about the year 2000. That's kind of when it really became dominant in the culture. This notion, it's not a movement, it's not an organized group of people or anything, but post-feminist culture became a very dominant moment. And it lasted a good almost 20 years where we didn't talk about misogyny, we didn't talk about patriarchy.
The girls were appearing in the lads mags.
It
was very liberating.
It was lad culture. So all of that 1970s stuff that we had gotten rid of, objectification of women, etc., etc. Post-feminist culture, which is you know, economically driven. It's part of neoliberal capitalism. It's like make money out of anything you can. Let's pretend that gender equality has been achieved. And that gives us all a level playing field to have a lot of fun. And we can start with the pole dancing and the lap dancing, and we can dig up all of these like really outmoded images of women, but we can just say it's ironic. And then you had the birth of lad culture in the 90s as well. So these things are kind of two sides of the same coin. And lad culture was reviving this kind of hard, you know, cheeky masculinity. But the problem is the irony that this was all supposed to be based on. If you remember Loaded magazine's strapline was for men who should know better. It was all funny, it was all ironic. And you kind of were looking at it going, this irony is going to slip really fast. And then successive generations who access this culture, they don't know the backstory, that this is a kind of a jokey, antagonistic, you know, argument with feminism. That's all gone, and this is simply the culture, right? That laid, or just finish the point really quick, that laid the foundation, and it opened up a huge vacuum, I think, in many ways, for much more sinister forces to come in and fill. Because there was a kind of, you know, we left a void there. We stopped talking about misogyny, we stopped talking about patriarchy. Everything was celebratory, fun, and ironic. And then you have these, you know, the real, like, anti-feminist groups moving in, using social media. It's like a perfect storm of things.
But it's how we count the costs of this. So I'm a former recovering business editor, and I was always trying to find ingenious ways to write about issues that matter to me most. And think of something that costs $4 billion a year to the Irish economy. If it was insurance fraud, if it was, you know, something to do with housing, we would be clearing the front pages. The issue that costs $4 billion a year to the Irish economy is gender-based violence. It used to be $2 billion a number of years ago, and it's gone up to $4 billion. And that is in direct and indirect costs, including the costs for young children who have to end up in counselling, including, you know, women and other victims of gender-based violence who have to take time off work, everything. This is a massive, massive societal issue, Eoghan. And like, this is a grin, this is a difficult conversation. I wasn't particularly looking forward to it in one sense, driving up this morning, because it brings you to a very, very dark place. It brings you to the darkest corners of our human experience. But I'm wondering, you work in this, you know, and ultimately maybe we're asking, are the kids going to be all right? Are we going to be all right within that context? But what are the ways out of this? What are the solutions to what the government has now acknowledged through the online task force that both you and Debbie sit on is a public health crisis? Like, what are the solutions that you're looking at?
So the solution is to look after our kids better. I mean, it does come down to that, and how we do that is, first of all, make sure that they're not exposed. So the online services exist to make money, and you can make money out of unhappy people much more than you can make money out of happy people. So they're incentivized to make children unhappy, because an unhappy girl or an insecure girl is known as vulnerable but valuable. Literally, we know that from the whistleblower from Facebook. And they've realized that a vulnerable, insecure boy is just as valuable to them. So they're in it to make money out of them. The porn, and I'm obsessed with the porn industry at the moment. The porn industry is a $100 billion a year industry. So there's massive, massive incentives for them to keep hold of our young people and to target them and to get hold of them as quickly as possible, which is why we have things like Peppa Pig porn and Fortnite porn and Paw Patrol porn now, to engage kids in ways that they understand and to normalize porn within their lives. Sorry, I know that's not the question you asked me. How we do it is, we don't have a law in Ireland that makes it illegal to expose children to porn. That doesn't exist. You'd think it would, coming from our history. It doesn't. It is illegal to expose porn for your own sexual gratification. But there's nothing to stop you just exposing a child to porn. That's not covered in our law. We could do that. It is being done at a European level, and Commission and Man is responsible for regulating it. We could create spaces for young people to have these discussions, so that, because as soon as they can talk to each other, because what the online world does is it promises them belonging. That's all they want as a teenage girl or a teenage boy. That is what they're evolutionary driven to seek out. How do I get to belong? And the online social media world promises them you will feel like you belong through likes and clicks and follows and views. But what it actually does, it creates more isolation in them. So they grow up feeling like they should feel like they belong, but they feel more and more isolated. And in that isolated space then, they are targeted with all the people. every night, 87% of 8 to 12-year-olds have access to their phones in their bedrooms at night, every night in Ireland. If I come to your home tonight and I ask to go up to the bedroom of your child and say, I'm not going to touch them, I'm just going to sit in the corner and I'm going to talk to them until they wake up tomorrow morning. I might ask them for a few images of themselves, but I won't touch them. Are you going to let me in the door? But 87% of us are allowing that to happen with our 8 to 12-year-olds in Ireland currently this year. Yeah. It's absolutely insane. So we could do an awful lot more just to hold off their experience of the online world until the regulators can get a handle of it. We can create spaces for them to reflect, not just to reflect on what, because as soon as you do, in the classrooms that I have, they are so relieved, like Patrick says, and you can feel it, and it's upsetting how relieved they are that somebody's talking to them about it, and also how relieved they are that they're not going to have to do what they thought was expected of them. When they hear the other guys in the class say, God, I was terrified about what I saw online, or I never wanted to interact with a girl because I just didn't want to be doing that. And when the girls can hear the guys, and I know that's, we talk about LGBT sex as well, but just in the heterosexual context, with girls hearing guys say that they were terrified and actually that's not what they want and this is what they would like a sexual encounter to be like, and the guys hearing the girls that they absolutely do not want to do all of the things that women online are generally responding very positively and with pleasure to all of this violence that's being perpetrated on them. They realize it speaks so truly to them because in themselves they know that they didn't want to do all that stuff. They just thought it was expected of them. And as soon as you create that space for them, they hold on to that. Fantastic. So that actually isn't what great sex might be. I might actually be able to have great sex that I might look forward to and that I just don't want to get over with, which is a lot of what the girls are saying, that they just want to get it over and done with because it's so terrifying.
And look, I mean, Patrick, sex education, look, I mean, anytime you kind of go and change the curriculum, you know, there can be a huge brouhaha about it. But what do you think, having worked with these young people and listened to them and written about their experiences, what do you think it is that they need? And I think as well, a lot of adults themselves want tools to be able to deal with all of this.
I think part of the solution is actually to widen it, because obviously all that focus is really, really important on the specific harms. But I think generally we've given up too much of our society to a bunch of tech billionaires. Like, so much of regular people's time now is spent on these platforms. I think you'll find very few people who feel that's healthy for them. Whenever we talk to kids, when I've done pieces on this, most kids, not all, but nearly all the kids go, I would prefer to exist in a time before phones. But if you say, but if I took your phone now, no, they don't want that, right? And that's because, which is why, that's the FOMO thing. Like, that's because we have normalized, and adults are normalizing this for kids too, and I think we can't underestimate that. Like, we're normalizing a life mediated through a screen, and I'm guilty of it sometimes too, but like, I've had to put like measures in place, and I'm a grown adult. I'm over 35, so my brain is fully developed. Yeah. But I still have to have rules for myself around my phone. Like, if I'm reading a book, I literally have to put it in another room. Yeah. And all that stuff is necessary for me, and I'm relatively normal. And I'm relatively kind of mature. So what must it be like a 14-year-old can't make those choices? So adults have to model those choices. Yeah. Like, I feel like all the regulation stuff is required, but also as a society, we should start re-normalizing the behaviour, changing what's normal.
And you know what, Debbie, like, you can't legislate away the need for, you know, good behaviours or better behaviours. And I'm really just interested in your experience for you know, on the online, you know, health task force, because whilst there is a criminal law dimension to a lot of this, this is often, what we're seeing are similar things to other addictions, be it, you know, drugs or alcohol or other, you know, harmful behaviours. So from a public health perspective, what are the kind of solutions that you're looking at, or is there best practice anywhere else? Like, it was interesting to see that the UK is changing its curriculum system to better educate the educators as well as the young peoples that they're dealing with.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of initiatives like that in the UK, for example, and the NGO sector has been quite to the fore in, you know, teaching teachers and training teachers and providing really excellent resources, but it is outsourced, it's not embedded in the curriculum, so that's a huge issue that we're still tackling. And the Online Health Task Force is looking at this from legal, regulatory, health and educational perspectives. So there's a lot of subgroups working on all of those different kinds of, because it has to be a multi-pronged kind of approach. And like, to go back to what Patrick said, I think it's a really important point. We've kind of let the paradigm shift in ways that are just unprecedented. I mean, why are institutions, governments, universities and schools using social media to have their accounts? Like, it's not a public sphere. It's a privately owned space that changes its terms and conditions all the time, and that uses
But
us.
can you put that genie back in the bottle?
Well, we have to ask this question as a society. I mean, we do have to say, well, what is democracy in a society now where elections are rigged through social media and bot farms, etc., and through algorithms? Our children's lives have been completely manipulated. Our lives have been 90% of what we consume is not decided by us on our phones or on our, on our feeds. We don't decide it, we don't search it, it's what comes to us. So we're not actually setting the agenda anymore, even for our personal consumption. But I think it's a bigger question about democracy. This is not an adequate space for any NGO or school or university or government body to do business, and loads of them are still on X. Loads of them are moving off X. But even if you go on to another platform, we need to redesign the internet. Like, we honestly really do need to pull the plug and start again, is my feeling. But how do we do that?
How do you rewild the internet? That's another topic for next year. What we're going to do is...
Well, we train kids to do it. Part of media literacy has to be teaching them to be the developers of the future and to rethink what digital democracy looks like. So it's digital critical literacy. It's not just about being a consumer. It's about empowering people to be
but that's embedding civics into your education.
Very briefly on language, we need to stop using terms like toxic masculinity and the manosphere. The manosphere sounds like a place that men belong. They don't. It's a young boys grooming forum. That's what the manosphere is, and we need to start calling it that.
I use male supremacism.
Because as a young boy, when they hear the manosphere, they're like, oh, that sounds like somewhere I could go and learn how to be a man. Yeah. It's ridiculous. And toxic masculinity, as soon as you say it, you're not, no, I mean, I don't know how many teenage boys are in the room today, but I doubt there are any. Do you know?
It's probably a separate debate, but how do we, Eoghan, in your view, make the conversation better, as in between men and women? Because the experience of young women and young men in the world is very, very different. You know that old adage, what men fear most is that women will laugh at them. What women fear most is that, they'll be raped or killed. And we move through the world. I even see it with younger women now, and they're moving through the world differently. I know a lot of young kids who aren't on Snapchat because of their mental health, who aren't drinking because they don't want to find themselves in compromised situations. We had a youth where you didn't have to worry about something going up on, Snapchat or another forum. So how do we better increase the conversation amongst the genders?
Ask the question and create a space for them to ask the question, what is this feeding in you? What need is it feeding in you? And then how can we provide that need in a way that doesn't make money out of you, but that actually promotes your personal positive development?
One of the best things about this festival is always the insights and questions that we get from the audience. I'm going to go to this young lady here first. We have a mic here, and also recovering legal affairs correspondent, spent a lot of time at legal conferences where lawyers don't know the difference between a question and a submission. But I know you're smarter than that. So to get to as many questions as possible, I would try and just make it as succinct as possible. This young lady here.
Hello. Sorry, thank you for an excellent panel and moderation, Dearbhail. It's a question for the panel. Any advice for parents? I think we too easily rush to blame teachers and schools, but teachers are in loco parentis for the day that the kids are in the schools, and a lot is happening outside. So tips for parents on how they can help their kids navigate this horrible world.
We go. Who wants to take that? Debbie.
Take it a little bit anyway. Obviously, I think we need to be much more open in terms of listening, conversations, and not just telling them and fear-mongering and saying, don't do this and don't do that. We have to listen, and listen actively to their realities, but also in a non-judgmental way. I think that's really important. But there probably needs, Irish people don't like talking about sex to their young people, I think. And if they do, it tends to be a lot to their daughters. I saw a post on social media the other day about this, epidemic of strangulation that girls in particular are experiencing, and somebody was absolutely horrified and said, oh my God, this is just horrific. Parents or mothers, talk to your daughters. And, thankfully, there was about 100 comments underneath saying, no, talk to your sons.
It was our Minister for Justice actually said it.
Yeah. Was it?
He said,
so, talk to your daughters. Why? I mean, why would you talk to your daughters? Why aren't you talking to your sons about sex? And I've seen it with even some of the most, progressive people I know. They've never spoken to their sons about sex or consent or what's appropriate.
But they worry about them.
They worry about it all the time. But I think a lot of the time they worry about their sons maybe getting into trouble, getting a girl pregnant, or getting accused of rape when he didn't do it, false rape claims. I think they worry a lot about the wrong things, and they're not teaching their sons to be, okay, this is a broad brush statement, a lot of people are doing this really well, but I think a lot of people aren't, because if they were, we wouldn't be seeing this this problem. Is like nobody ever spoke to me about this. Nobody ever talked openly about what is intimacy, what is consent. Those conversations have to happen, and not in a don't get a girl pregnant or don't get yourself into trouble way. It should be a much more positive conversation.
And to start as young as you possibly can, because I think it can be hard for parents to know what non-judgmental looks like, and actually it's curiosity. That's what it is. So as soon as your child, whether it's a 6 years old or 9 years old, comes to you and says, Mom or Dad, I've seen something on my phone, and you go, Jesus, give me that, and they never get access to it again, it's actually really difficult, but really important that in that moment you grab yourself and just say, oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
What was that like for you? Because then they know that you care about them, you're interested in their experience, and it's also really important to say they know you are not the expert in their lives. They know we grew up in a totally different area. They know that they're the expert, and you need to acknowledge that first thing. How do you feel about that? Have you seen that before? How did that make you feel? Let's have a chat about it. And if you do that the first couple of times, they know they can keep coming to you. They stay open, and then you can start saying, well, actually, do you know what? That makes me really upset that you've seen that. And then you can start reflecting your experience, and they can see, and they trust you. They know you care about them more than anybody else in the world. But it's just about having that wherewithal not to shut it down the first time it happens.
Not to freak out. Okay, they're going to, oh my goodness, loads, go to this lady here, and then I'm going to go to that little stripy hand in the middle there. Sorry, I can't see too out of the lighting, so.
I think a great learning was that my 68-year-old feed is entirely different to, my grandkids. So that's kind of shocking. And does it make a total mockery of the word consent? We have a perception in our age group that consent is real high on the agenda. And consent isn't just about sex, but it's about standing up for yourself with an employer, about feeling good for yourself and asserting your rights. So is consent in today's world and what you've described with 8 to 12-year-olds, is that just a silly notion?
No, I would say no. I think it's really important that we have the discussion about consent, and we are, like in schools, and I think in families and in primary schools and secondary schools, we are having age-appropriate discussions about consent in ways that we are providing the students the skills to recognise what it feels like, what it sounds like, what it looks like. But unfortunately, in a world where 1 in 10 9-year-olds, a third of 11-year-olds, and over 50% of kids before they get to secondary school have been exposed to porn, the concepts of consent are being undermined in such a visceral and a way that is sexually conditioning them to know what consent means theoretically, but in their real lived experience of what's expected of them, it doesn't exist.
And especially even when adults are discussing things like consensual non-consent and all of these very tricky things. So if you have not seen it, there is a great little tool. If you Google cup of tea and consent, I don't know if anybody's seen the wonderful little video which can be shown to anyone of all ages, with a cup of tea rather than a sexual act. And it really, I think, captures for children and adults the concept quite well. There was a lady here with, I was going to say a stripy arm, but a lovely blouse with stripes on it. I'll go to her.
Sorry. Thanks for a brilliant discussion, first of all. I am a former primary school principal, and I'm going to ask the panel a question. Should we simply ban smartphones for, let's say, under 14s, under 16s? I really strongly believe we should, but I'm asking you the question.
I think that there's a strong argument that we should be denormalizing it. Like, I definitely feel like when I've done pieces about young people with phones, like some kids got smartphones as young as like 9, 10, and it just feels really reckless to me. But then I feel like maybe I know more because of the journalism I've done than some parents do. Like, it feels like some parents think there's a safe children's version of the internet that the kids can access. I feel like there should be a wider discussion, like even beyond, I'm not sure about regulating it, but I think even beyond like the issues of like damaging material and like rape material and all the horrible things they might see. I think there should also be a wider discussion about other things that are being stolen from them. Like, I interviewed some psychologists and they talked about the big problem is displacement. So when a kid is choosing to be on their phone rather than meet their friends or rather than play football, that's an issue, and I think most teachers will say that's increasingly happening. So even beyond what they're seeing, I think we need to, as a society, just stop normalizing it. And actually back to like what parents can do, I think they can model if they're capable of it, because I think
if they're not on their phone the whole time.
Yeah, I think we should model not using our phones. You know,
but there is a difficulty and a reality of that, is that we can't really do anything without our phones anymore. We can't pay a bill. We can't, you know, your vet medication is on everything, like literally everything.
There's a dependency.
It should be a tool, not a place we live. And I think we've convinced ourselves it's a place we all live now. It's an amazing tool, like smartphones, the stuff we can do. But the tech companies make more money if we're just mindlessly staring at it all the time.
I think it's really important to say, because obviously we've talked about a lot of the negatives, like it is an amazing tool for kids as well, in terms of creativity and entertainment and information and education and accessing their rights if they can't do that in the physical world. It's absolutely brilliant, but we need to create a space where it is safe for them to go online, so that what parents need to do is just decide when it's appropriate to allow your child on the internet or not. And you should know as parents, like you know when you send your child to school now or to a youth club, that they're going to be safe in the locum parentis of the mandated person who's meant to look after them, as you were. But we need to create that online, and it's ridiculous that we haven't. That when the internet was created, it wasn't created for children, but a third of internet users are now children. And we need to create an environment that is safe for them and adequate for them. I would say absolutely no to a ban, but I'd say certainly the way the online world is at the moment, kids don't need it for a long, long time, so I would delay it much later than they're currently getting it.
Just a quick question. Just put your hands up if you would support a smartphone ban in schools for under 14s.
In schools.
In schools.
In schools.
In schools, most schools have an effective ban anyway, currently. Most do.
Smartphone bans for any children? Actual smartphone bans?
Underage.
Underage. Under let's say 15. Good luck trying.
One more question. Holding the tech companies criminally responsible for the harms that they're doing to our children. Now, you need to tell your politicians that. Seriously.
I'm going to take just one more question here, because I'm conscious that there are other talks taking place. I'm going to go to this lady in the second row. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for a wonderful discussion. I'm the mum of 3 boys, 2 13-year-olds and a 12-year-old, so I feel like I'm in the eye of the storm. I've 2 questions. I am wondering, first of all, why there are not more men defending themselves. Because I feel the term toxic masculinity is very damaging, and it has been bandied around. I hear girls in my boys' classes saying, stop being so toxic. It's toxic masculinity. You're being very alpha. So my question is twofold, and I'd like to thank my nephew for coming along with me this morning. He's possibly the youngest man in the room. I don't know.
Well done.
Why are the men not saying this is not how masculinity is? Masculinity is a good thing.
Absolutely.
Femininity is a good thing.
Yeah.
Toxic behaviour is a bad thing.
Yeah.
And how do we change it from being toxic masculinity to toxic behaviour?
I think a lot of people have stopped, certainly I think people like us have stopped using toxic masculinity in educational environments, because we understand that it has been misunderstood. Because toxic masculinity was never saying that all masculinity is toxic. It was never saying that. It's saying that certain traits within patriarchal culture that afford men power and privilege, like being macho, repressing emotion, being violent, etc., using excessive violence, objectifying women, that those traits that afford men privilege in their peer groups and in society, they're condoned, not by everybody, but if you're in a certain peer group, those traits do give you power and privilege. Those are toxic traits. That's what toxic masculinity is. It's separating that out. It's not saying all masculinity is toxic. Not all masculinity is for men either. Women can be masculine, men can be feminine. So we need to, break down all of that boundary.
But the language does matter.
Language absolutely
does
matters.
matter.
And because it's been so broadly misinterpreted, we've abandoned it, basically. The other reason is, I think, is that if you're talking about toxic masculinity and positive masculinity, it falls into this danger of certain types. And then you think, well, if you do a few good things, then you're positive masculinity. And if you do one or two bad things, then you're toxic masculinity. So it's been so badly misunderstood. Most people are a mixture. You know, we all do good and bad things. A lot of boys are trying to reconstruct their masculinity, and they're, you know, doing a really good job of it. It doesn't mean that they're still not upholding certain toxic models or behaviors, because they can't get out of them. They're, you know, they're tied into.
And also a lot of young people are
complex.
A lot of young men are vulnerable. So I get the problem with the term toxic masculinity, but like Debbie says, I don't think that's what it was intended as originally. So I find it now not a useful term because people misunderstand it. But at the same time, I think there is a need to understand, like, there are a lot of men out there, like I think Eoghan has been defending his young students and the boys. There's a lack of, I think sometimes people, I think for a while people forgot that young boys were vulnerable and young men were vulnerable as well, and they weren't all.
Well, Patrick, can I give? There's a phenomenon aligned to that. I've had the great privilege across my career to be taking part in a lot of debates, including a lot of debates about gender-based violence. And any time I'm on TV or radio or in a public forum, I feel required, as most women do, to say, of course, we're not talking about all men, you know, and it's the not all men, you know, phenomenon. When we know, we feel we don't even need to say, we're not talking about the vast majority of men. It's not, you know, but we then feel that need to step into the breach.
You know, it's not all men, but all men need to be part of the solution.
Absolutely, and all men need to take ownership of it needing to be not one man. Like, we know not all men, but it should not be one man. And I think men are in a very difficult position. I know, because I'm trying hard at the moment. But like, I think and not to say that we're all represented by this, but the dad in Adolescence, like, they're trying to figure out what their own masculinity is and trying to debunk a lot of that for themselves. And it can be terrifying to put yourself out there. The amount of abuse I get for just saying that I don't want to be somebody who's called on to protect or provide for the women in their life. I want to create a society that women don't need protection and can provide for themselves. That I had to leave X because of that. Like, it was insane. And it's all from men telling me I'm not a man. And I had this lovely moment from my boys the next day when I went into class, because they'd all gone around to one of their houses to watch the program together because their teacher was on it. And they came in the next day and they said, yeah, I thought it was good, and we unpacked it a bit. But they also then said, please don't go on Twitter, because what they're saying about you isn't true. They don't know you and they don't know anything. And that's not about me. That's about how amazing the guys are at that age, at being able to say, we love you, we care about you, we know what vulnerable masculinity is, we know that it isn't that masculinity that's toxic, it's social media that's toxic, it's people who are trying to make money out of us that's toxic. The porn industry is toxic. Masculinity is amazing. We just need to broaden it, because right now it's becoming really, really narrow, and that's isolating as well, because so many men don't fit into that, and they're feeling that they're not masculine, and that's a really difficult place for them to grow up in as well.
Overly narrow masculinity might be a better term.
Yes.
Because I think one of the problems with what we were calling toxic masculinity up until recently, and now is the idea that a lot of what they're presenting is a version of masculinity that is really constrictive. There's versions of femininity that are really constrictive as well, and most people are individuals and they don't fit the boxes, and they start feeling bad if they don't fit the box.
And the point about the toxicity as well is that what it really means is that those narrow, restrictive, you know, gender scripts are harmful. You know, they restrict you in terms of your career choice, in terms of your ability as a human being, but they can also be really harmful. If you're bottling up emotion because to show emotion would in some way emasculate you, that is doing you harm psychologically. It's doing your mental health harm if you can't talk to your friends about your problems openly. So it's more about, the toxicity only ever meant harmful modes of gender performance.
Well, I'm choosing, because I've gone way over time, I'm choosing to end this on a hopeful note, which is to take Eoghan's word about how masculinity is amazing and can be amazing and should be celebrated. And we should find better ways. This has been a very, very, I think it's probably, Katrina, one of the most challenging conversations that we've had at the series here, but one that is necessary. And you know, a hat tip to the producers of adolescence for piercing through. And actually, no matter what we think of the various lens, it certainly has opened a really, really necessary conversation. And it's great to see that it is being taken seriously at a national level in the form of the task force. And thank you, Debbie and Eoghan. We wish you well in terms of solutions. And Patrick, thank you much for your contribution to raising an issue that one mightn't otherwise see in the mainstream media. It has been, as always, an absolute pleasure to be here for the festival. Thank you for coming out in your numbers and for really adding a richness to the conversation, and enjoy the rest of the festival. Thanks, Sarah. Thank you very much. Thanks, Sarah. Thank you very much.